All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat. To thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the Shirm and Drashos this month in memory of her husband Avi Strimber, Avraham ben Kallman, Eliazer, Halevi. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank Avi Tobias for dedicating all of the Shirm and Drashos this month in appreciation of the shir and of the Ribbon Shalom's incredible Torah. So with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Ches. We are picking up in Miras Hashem on Zayin Amud Beis, and we are picking up, I believe Lememra. B'may Kamiflagi. Right, B'may Kamiflagi? Does that look right? Good. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 lines up from the bottom. So B'may Kamiflagi. So if you remember again, we ended off with a very interesting machlokas, a very interesting discussion about is a mitzora, what we call a mitzora muchlat, right, which is a confirmed mitzora, a person who is definitively tamei. Is such an individual permitted to live with his wife, tash mishamita, relations, is that permitted or not? So we had Rabbi Yehuda saying that halacha l'maisa, it's only interesting enough during the days of purification, not during the days of tumah, that he's not allowed to be with his wife. Say that differently. Rabbi Yehuda says yes, when he is tamei, he is permitted to go ahead and be with his wife. It is only during the 7 days of his purity that he's counting, that he's not allowed to be with his wife. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says no, it's a kal v'chomer. If he can't be with his wife during the 7 days of purification, he certainly cannot live with her during the time that he is tamei. This is the fundamental machlokes. So the Gemara will say as follows. So b'maikim, what are they arguing about? So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Savar Gali Rachmana b'Meisi Kuro the kol shekain b'meichi luto. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, look, the Torah explicitly says that he's not allowed to live with his wife, because remember again, the Torah says that he has to live michutz la'ohel, outside of the tent. And the Gemara said that a tent is a reference to one's marital relationship. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says like this: if he has to live outside of the quote-unquote tent during the days of his purification, then Allah has kama v'kama, all the more so that he has to live outside of the tent during the days of his tumah. Umar sabar, my de gali gali, umay de lo gali. So Rabbi Yehuda will say, what the Torah told us, the Torah told us. What the Torah didn't tell us, the Torah didn't tell us. In other words, the Torah told us that he has to live outside of the tent during the days of his purification. That's what I know. Why should you automatically then go and apply that same standard when he is in his state of tumah? To which the Gemara says as follows. To which the Gemara says, Lememra, is this to say, to be kohen tal yemilsa? So now the Gemara is taking a step back here for just a moment and saying, just in general, we'll say, first of all, I'll tell you how we paskin. The way we paskin, the Rambam paskins, is that a mitzora muchlat is permitted b'tash mishamita. So a person who is a confirmed mitzora, right, meaning he's a definitive mitzora, such an individual is permitted to go ahead and engage in marital relations. Now again, we also paskin that during the 7 days of his purification process, he's not allowed to. Now I will say, remember, that last piece of information is not subject to dispute. Why not? That's a pasuk. Right? So everyone's going to agree that during the days, ultimately, again, of his purification, he's sitting michutz la'ohel, outside of the tent, no relations. But during the days of his actual tumah, he is permitted to live with his wives. To which the Gemara says, L'meimra, the Bitcoin Tali Milsa. We'll say, we're going back now to the original discussion. How did we get into this? How do we get into this? We'll say, because we had a Mishnah that discussed what happens if a person presents with tzara'as symptoms during Chol Hamoed. Should you go to the Kohen or not? So remember again, Rabbi Meir said, go to the Kohen. If you're tahar, the Kohen is going to tell you, and if you're tamei, what's going to happen? He's not going to say, come back after Yom Tov. Now the Chachamim say, no, we don't show up to the Kohen at all. Don't show up to the Kohen at all. To which the Gemara says, L'meimra, the Kohen tal yemilsa. So are you telling me now that the entire process of tzaras is dependent on the Kohen? Right? I was supposed to say, and this is true whether both according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, everyone is making the Kohen an integral and central part of this process. So the Gemara says, yes, that is true. Vatanya, we learned, Ubayom Hiraos, So I'll say, so the pasuk says as follows. The pasuk says, ubiyom hiraos bo basar chay yitma. So we'll say the day that you're seen by the Kohen, right? But ubiyom hiraos. The Gemara says, what do we learn from that? Ubayom hiraos, on the day that you are seen by the Kohen. Yesh yom sha'at ro'abo. There are days in which you are seen by the Kohen. The yesh yom sha'at ro'abo. I was really talking to the Kohen. Kohen, there are days in which you look at saras, and there are days in which you won't look at tzaras. What does that mean? Mikan, Amru, from here we see, what the Gemara is picking up on over the drush is, Ubayom heiraos. It's just an interesting lashon, right? On the day it will be seen, which makes it sound like there are days in which you see tzaras, and there are days in which you don't see tzaras. So, what's an example of days in which I don't see tzaras? Mikan Amru, Chasan shenola bonega. It's a chasan, right? The chasan, what's the definition of a chasan? Means a man who got married and he's within Sheva Brachos, within the first days of marriage. No lo zayimei mishta, lo ulabeso l'ksuso. So we'll say, so we give him 7 days. So you know what? We're not looking at any blemishes for 7 days. First, we're going to leave that alone for 7 days. So we'll say it's not just him, but it's his house. Because remember again, there's a concept of tzaras habatim, which means tzaras that could sprout up in your home. We won't examine any home tzaras either. So ultimately, uluksuso for his clothing as well. So we'll say, so ultimately again, we go ahead and we tell him no blemishes. We'll say, if you think about this, by the way, what a powerful yisod in relationships as well. Sometimes, if you want to build a good marriage, a meaningful relationship, you have to have Sheva Brachos without seeing nigoim, right? You have to try to go 7 days. Try to go 7 days without seeing a blemish, right? It's a good exercise in general in marriage, even if a person has been married for many years, right? Try to establish it. I'm going to go X amount of time, maybe 7 days is a good one, Sheva Brachos, and I'm not going to find a blemish in you. I'm not going to look for something wrong. And ultimately, what's incredible, if we engage in that exercise, you begin to see how many positive things your spouse really has. Okay, after 7 days, you might find the faults as well, but at least then you contextualize the shortcomings and realize that they are so outnumbered by the positive things. For 7 days, don't look for a nega. That is the secret to marital bliss. So the Gemara says, and it's free. The chim beregel, and so will say again, if he shows up on Yom Tiv, no snin lo shivas regel. And I will say, now the chim beregel is not necessarily going on the chasen. The chim beregel is about any person, right? Any guy shows up with tzaras. Ultimately, again on Yom Tiv, we tell him, you know what? Come back after Yom Tiv. So I will say, Rebbe, so this is learned out from the pasuk of ubayom heiraos, on the day that he is seen. There are days, or the day that he will see, there are days that you look, there are days that you don't look. Rebbe says, I don't need that drasha. Harei Omer, v'tziva hakohen, listen to this, Rebbe says, it's a different pasuk. Harei Omer, v'tziva hakohen, upinu es habayis. So we'll say, listen to this, this is incredible. This is talking about saras habatim. So we'll say, remember again, without going into all the details here, a person goes ahead and has some type of blemish that occurs in their home. And so what happens? So the Kohen sees it, and he sees it a second time, and now he suspects that it's going to be tzaras. So he's coming to the home. Why is he coming to the home? To declare tameh. What does the Kohen do before he arrives at home? He sends a message. What's the message? Clear out your stuff. Because you're about to say anything inside of the home at the time of the declaration of Tumas Tzaras becomes Tameh. So the Kohen knows it's coming down the pike, but remember again, it's an incredible thing that nothing becomes, the house does not become stricken with Tzaras until when? So the Kohen makes his declaration. So he's like, I haven't gotten there yet. Get the stuff out of the house. So Allah says, listen to this. So Rebbe says, "Im mamtino ledavar harishus koshkin ledvar mitzvah." So Rebbe will say, if we go ahead and we essentially delay tzaras declaration for a dvar rishus, for a mundane matter. We'll say, what's the mundane matter in this case? What's the mundane matter? Saving your stuff, right? So the Kohen will say, okay, I'm going to walk slowly to get to Ruvain's house before I declare it. Right, a tzaras zone, a closed tzaras zone. Right, so before I get there, I'm going to walk slowly. Get your stuff out. So Rebbe says, if we delay the tzaras declaration for Dvar Rishus, then for a mundane matter, then all the more so we could delay it for a Dvar Mitzvah. And Abba said, what are the examples of a Dvar Mitzvah? Again, a Chassan during Sheva Brachas, someone else during Yom Tov, V'samachta b'chagecha. Incredible. So my benai, Abba say, so interesting enough, what's the difference between them, these two opinions? So Amar Abai, Mashmal's Darshan, Ika benai. Abai says the truth is there's no practical difference. The only difference is where they're learning it out from. See, Abba say, the first opinion is learning it out from Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda's learning it out from Ubeyom Heiraos, right? And he darshans from that. There are days you look at Tzaras, there are days you don't look at Tzaras. Rebbe is learning it out from Tzaras Habatim, the Tziva HaKohen. The fact that the Kohen delays his declaration to save your possessions tells me if you could do it for a Dvar Rishus, you certainly could do it for a Dvar Mitzvah. So what's the practical difference? So Abaye says the truth is there is no practical difference. They're actually saying the same thing. The machlokis is just what is the source. Now listen, I watch this. Rava says no, there actually is a practical difference. But Rava Amar, Dvar HaRishus Ika Beinayu. Rava says, what are you talking about? There is a major practical difference. Rabbi say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the license to delay Tzaras declaration is only in what case? Only in what case? A Dvar Mitzvah. Remember again, because his examples. He's learning out from B'Yom Heiraos, and he's saying, if you're a Chassan and Sheva Brachas, if it's Yom Tov, you could delay. But according to Rabbi Yehuda's drasha, you don't necessarily have the right to delay a Tzaras declaration for a Dvar Rishus. Now, that being said, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, when can you delay for a Dvar Rishus? For Tzaras Habatim, Tzaras in your home, because then the Torah, the Kohen, that's a pasuk. Right? The pasuk says that the Kohen says, clear out the house before I get there. So it could be that in the case of house Tzaras, you could delay for Dvar Rishus, but what we call of Tzaras Haguf, Tzaras on your body, the only right you have to delay is for a Dvar Mitzvah, not for a Dvar Rishus. Whereas Rebbe will say, no, just as you could delay Tzaras Habatim for a Dvar Rishus, you could also delay the declaration of Tzaras Haguf for a Dvar Rishus as well. To which the Gemara Rabbi Huda says, Rabbi Huda, Mehasam lo Gamrinan. V'Rava Amar Dvar Rishus Ika Beinayu. Good. Rabbi Huda Mehasam lo Gamrinan Dechideshu. And Rava say Rabbi Huda will not learn out Tzaras Haguf from Tzaras Habayis for one simple reason. The whole notion of Tzaras Habayis is an incredible chiddush. It's an incredible novelty. What's the novelty? About top of chas, da'etzim ba'avana ba'amala matamu, v'hachum matamu. Because in general, the halacha is that etzim and avanim, right, wood and stones do not contract ritual impurity. They do not become tamei. Yet the only one case where they do become tamei is in Tzaras Habatim, is in home Tzaras. And therefore Rabbi Huda feels that because that is such a chiddush, you can't learn out bodily Tzaras from house Tzaras. So I will say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, interestingly enough, what you have over here is as follows. You have Rabbi Huda saying that, look, there's two different halachas. There's halachas of Tzaras Haguf, Tzaras Habatim. So Tzaras Haguf, what's the halacha? We could delay Tzaras declaration. When? What we call Dvar Mitzvah. Chassan, Chalamayit, and if you could come up with any other case of Dvar Mitzvah, if there's a mitzvah reason to delay the declaration, we could do so. But you cannot delay for a Dvar Rishus. It has to be a Dvar Mitzvah. But yet, even Rabbi Huda will agree in Tzaras Habatim, in house Tzaras, you could delay even for a Dvar Rishus. And Rabbi said, that's not a chiddush, that's the pasuk. Because there the Kohen says, before I get to the house, clean out your stuff. On the other hand, Rebbe will say, once you establish that for Tzaras Habatim you could delay even for a Dvar Rishus, then Tzaras is Tzaras. And therefore by Tzaras Haguf, you could also delay for a Dvar Rishus as well. A really fascinating and incredible machlokes. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, V'Rebbe Amar Itzterich. Rebbe says the truth is you need to state this in both cases. Why? Watch this. We'll say, look at Rashi. Rebbe Amar Itzterich Kilomar Afagav Dialef Tuma de Gufei Mituma de Lav Gufei Lidvar Rishus Mivitziva HaKohen Itzterich B'Yomer Espo. So we'll say, now listen to this. Now Rebbe's drush is very interesting. Rebbe's going to say that in the same way of Tzaras Habatim, you could delay the declaration for a Dvar Rishus. Tzaras Haguf is learned out from Tzaras Habayis. And if in Saras Habayis, you could delay the declaration even for a Dvar Rishus, in Saras Haguf, you could do the same as well. So according to Rebbe, then we have to ask, if that's the case, then why do I need the pasuk of Ubayom Heraos? To which Rebbe will say, I need both pasukim, and I'll tell you why. Because of Rachmana B'yom Heraos Bo, if the Torah would have just said Ubayom Heraos Bo, which I will say seems to tell us that there are days you look at Saras, days you don't look at Saras. Havamina, the Dvar Mitzvah and the Dvar Rishus Lo. I would have thought the only time you could delay a Saras declaration is when, in a case of a Dvar Mitzvah, but not for a Dvar Rishus. Therefore, Chasav Rachmana B'tziva HaKoin. Therefore, the pasuk says B'tziva HaKoin, and B'tziva HaKoin teaches us by Saras Habatim that you could delay for a Dvar Rishus. And if by Saras Habatim you could delay for a Dvar Rishus, so by Saras Haguf you could do the same. Because of Rachmana B'tziva HaKoin, if the Torah would have just said B'tziva HaKoin and left out B'yom Heraos, Hava Amina Hani In Telaf Tuma Dugufei. I would have thought like this: the reason you could delay Saras Habatim, ultimately again, is because again, it's not bodily tzaras. And maybe we just treat non-bodily tzaras in a more makel, in a more lenient fashion. Abal tuma de gufei ema mechza chazya. But ultimately, again, in tuma de gufei, perhaps not. Ultimately, therefore, the Gemara says, tzricha, therefore both psukim are necessary. Sefer Rabbi will say, what ends off over here is something really amazing. Is a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rebbe. And I will say, here's what they agree on. Let's go with what they agree on. What do they agree on? What's the one point everyone agrees on? Tzaras Habatim. What can you do with Tzaras Habatim? When are you allowed to delay a declaration for Tzaras Habatim? Right? For pretty much any reason. Right? Dvar Mitzvah and even Dvar Rishus. Right? Now remember, that's not a Chiddush. Why is that not a Chiddush? Where do we get that from? That's a pasuk, because the Torah says the Kohen will send word, and he tells you to clear out your house before he gets there. What is the Kohen doing? He's saving my money, he's saving my possessions. That's a Dvar Rishus. So everyone agrees on that point. Wherein lies the machlokes? The machlokes is, can you apply that standard to Tzaras Haguf? That's the machlokes. So Rebbe says, yes, you can. And just like you could delay a tzaras declaration for Dvar Rishus by your home, you could do so for bodily tzaras as well. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, tzaras habatin, right? The home tzaras has its halacha. Tzaras haguf can be delayed, but only for what purpose? For Dvar Mitzvah. Beautiful. So we'll say that's the fundamental machlokes. Amar Mar, Yeshom Shata Rabba, Yeshom Shiata Rabba. So going back to what we said before, there are days in which the Kohen is permitted to examine tzaras, and days in which he does not. So the Gemara says, "My mashma." Amar Abaye. So we'll say, so how do you see that? In other words, they're darshaning this from the pasuk of Ubayom Heraos. So how do you see that in the words? Listen to this. Amar Abaye Imkain Liftov Rachmana Biyom. See, the Torah could have just said Biyom Heraos, right? On the day that the nega, that the blemish is seen by the Kohen. Why do you have to write Ubayom, which is a longer form? Now, I'll say, we've been around the Talmudic block enough to know that whenever the Torah writes a word in what appears to be an unnecessarily elongated fashion, even if it's just elongated by a letter or two, it allows us to make a drasha with the word. So Abaye says the Torah could have just said, Biyom Heraos, on the day that the nega is seen by the Kohen. Why does the Torah have to write Ubayom? To which the Gemara says, My Ubayom Shmamina Yesh Yom Sha'ataroah V'Yesh Yom Shi'ataroah Bo. So I'll say Ubayom teaches me that what? Ubayom teaches me that again, there's a drasha. There's a day that the Kohen does look, and there's a day that the Kohen doesn't look. That's the drasha. Rava Amar Rava says no. Kula Krayisera. The truth is, yes and no. I agree with you, but the truth is, the whole pasuk itself is unnecessary. Kula Krayisera. It's an extraneous pasuk. Why? He says De'im came lichtov rachmana ubeheraos. The Torah, when it says meaning, it means the whole word is extra. The Torah doesn't even have to say bayom at all. You can leave out that word in its totality. Just say ubeheraos, when the nega is seen by the Kohen. The whole word ubayom is extra. So the Gemara says, my ubayom shmamina yesh yom sha'ataroah bo v'yesh yom shiat haroa bo. So both say the whole. So again, what's great about these machloks, both say, is they're not arguing on the facts, right? They're not arguing on the conclusion. They're arguing on the drasha. So here you have Abaye saying the Torah could have said bayom. Instead, it says ubayom. What's the drasha? There are days that you look at the nega, there are days that you don't, right? Days that you don't. So Rava says, no, the drush is actually more profound. The whole word ubayom is an extra word. The whole word is an extra word. And therefore, again, the word also teaches, but again, the drush is the same to teach me. There are days when I'll examine the blemish, days in which I won't. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Abaye, this Abaye says, no. The word bayom is actually necessary. I'll tell you why. Listen, this is fascinating. No, both say bayom is actually important. Because what does bayom teach me? That a Kohen is only permitted to go ahead and examine tzara'as when? By day. You can't look at a blemish, you can't look at the nega at night, only by day. Only by day. So the Gemara says, V'rava Amar, so both say, so therefore Abaye says that you need the word ubayom to teach you that halacha. So where does Rava get that from? V'rava, biyom v'lav minole, from Rava, where do I learn this halacha that you could only examine it by day and not at night? Nafgale, listen to this, milachol mare ene hakoin. So both say, listen to this. So they learn out from the pasuk. Ultimately, again, from the vision, right, the way the Kohen sees it. So Rava will say that means bayom, right? Mare means when the Kohen can see it. When could the Kohen see it? By day and not by night. To which the Abaye says, no, that comes to teach you something different. Hahu lemibayle lemeute suma ba'achas me'inav. I will say that comes to exclude a Kohen who is blind in one eye. Milachol mare eine hakohen. In order for a Kohen to paskin on sara'as shailas, he has to have vision on both eyes. Because the Torah says, right, the chol mare eine hakohen, the Kohen's eyes see it. Alright, v'rava, nami baile lachi, Rava, don't you need this pasuk for the same drasha? Einachinami, ve'ela bayom v'lo balayla, nafgele michenega nira li babayis. So we'll say, so where does Rava learn this out from? Rava learns out the idea that you could only go ahead and look at the tzaras by day and not by night from the lashon of kinega nira li babayis. Li velo laori. It's seen by me and not with the assistance of any light, which means that it's only examined by daylight. Abaye will say, if you learn it out from there, hava amina hani mili tuma delav gufei. I might have thought this only applies to, let's say, tzaras of the home or tzaras of clothing. Aval tuma de gufei, but a person has tzaras literally on his body. Afilu la'oro, unless you perhaps, again, he's even able to examine the blemish by light, by artificial light, or by candlelight, I should say. Kamashmal, not the case. So both say, interestingly enough, I was going to point out, the facts here aren't disputed, right? Interestingly enough, the Kohen could only examine tzaras blemishes by day. In fact, the halacha is that a Kohen who is blind in one eye is not permitted to rule on tzaras blemishes. Right? So these facts are all agreed upon. The machlokes ultimately, the shaila is the drasha. How do you learn it out from? But again, I both say, but the original machlokes, previous machlokes in Rabbi and Rabbi Huda, that machlokes does stand in that what everyone is agreeing on is as follows. In Tzaras Habatim, you could delay the Tzaras declaration even for a Dvar Rishos, right? It doesn't have to be a Dvar Mitzvah. On a person, everyone agrees you could delay it for a Dvar Mitzvah, right? The machlokes is, can you delay Tzaras Haguf, the declaration of Guf Tzaras, for a Dvar Rishos? Rabbi Huda is saying no, Rabbi is saying yes. I will say, so again, for our purposes though, let's close out the sugya with some halacha l'maisa. Remember, how did this whole thing start? This whole thing started with, what do you do if you present with a tzaras blemish on Yom Tov, on Chol HaMoed? Do you go to the Kohen or not? So we'll say, so the Rambam Paskins, the Rambam says this is in Hilchos Yom Tov. Interesting, not in Hilchos Tzaras. In Hilchos Yom Tov, let me see if I think I printed out Hilchos Tzaras as well. No. Okay, so in Hilchos Yom Tov, the Rambam writes as follows. This is in Perek Zayin Halacha Tazayin. Very simple. He says, Ein roan es hanagan b'moed. Shema yimatzei tamei v'nimtza chago nepach le'evel. So the way the Rambam Paskins is, you don't go to the Kohen on the Yom Tiv. You just don't go. So in other words, we adopt essentially the second opinion, not that you go, and if the Kohen, right, if you're tar, the Kohen will tell you tar, and if you're not, he'll tell you come back after Yom Tiv. You don't show up to the Kohen on Chol Hamoed, right? And if you were to show up, the Kohen would tell you, sorry, closed, right? Closed. Come back after Yom Tiv, and would not even examine it. In interest of the Magid Mishnah highlights this idea, and he says, Rabbi Meir Omer Roan Anagam v'Hakev Alo l'Hachmir, and Rabbi Yossi is Lo l'Hakev l'Hachmir. So the Rambam says, we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the one who said, we just don't examine Nigoim. We don't examine Saras on Chol Hamoed at all. So if you show up, so the Rambam therefore says, don't show up, don't go to the Kohen. But if you did, the Kohen won't even examine at all. The Kohen will just simply tell you to come back after Yom Tov. We'll say, beautiful. Let's go right there. Mishnah. We'll say, really great sugyas. Va'od am Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says as follows. Melakit Adam. Mishnah and Chesam Dalef. Melakit Adam atzamos aviv v'imo mibnei shesimchi lo. Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi say that this is on Chol Hamoed. On Chol Hamoed, you're allowed to collect the bones of your father or your mother. Rashi says, and reinter them into a family grave. So we'll say it's actually very interesting. If you've ever been in Yerushalayim, in East Yerushalayim, to the kever of Shimon HaTzadik, right? Shimon HaTzadik, right? This is Shimon HaTzadik from Pirkei Avos, right? The last member of the Anshe Knesset Hagedolah. So he's buried in East Yerushalayim. So right next to his grave, they uncovered, there's a fascinating, there's a burial site. They call it the Ma'ara of the Sanhedrin HaKatana, right? Sanhedrin HaKatan. It's a mass burial grave. And what you see in there is something fascinating. What they often used to do is a person would die, and they would go ahead and people die, and they would place the body like in a cave. And often what they were actually going to see is the next Mishnah, they would carve out places inside the wall of the cave. Place the body there, the body decomposes, and then often what they would do afterwards is collect the bones and reinter the bones in a family plot. So that's the classic case of likot atzamos. So again, the body was buried properly, then the bones are taken and reinterred in a family plot. So this Rabbi Meir says a person could do this on Chol Hamoed. Now everyone's saying, why can you do this on Chol Hamoed? Ultimately, Rabbi Meir says because it's a simcha. What's the simcha? That a person has the opportunity to bring his parents' remains to final resting place in the family plot. Right? That's a simcha. Rabbi Yossi says, Evahul. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't do that on Chol Hamoed, because at the end of the day, that creates avelos, both emotionally as well as halachically, as we'll see in the Gemara. And remember, on Yom Tiv, there's a mitzvah of samachta b'chagecha. You have to be in a state of joy. So therefore, you can't go out and do this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Lo ya'ora adam al meso. A person should not go ahead now. If you look at Rashi over here, Lo ya'ora adam al meso. We'll say Yo'orer is a lashon of like his orerus, of becoming awakened, right? So literally a person should not emotionally awaken himself about his dead. So we'll say, what does this mean? Look at Rashi. Lo Yo'ora Adam, Lo Yo'ora Meso, Imes Lo Mes Chodesh O Chodshayim Kodem HaMoed, Lo Ya'arer, Mefarish B'Gemara, Kad Hadar Sabdana B'Ma'arava. So we'll say, the idea over here is that we're going to see in the Gemara what it means is that Allah Chalamais, if someone lost a relative within a month or two before Yom Tiv, they used to have professional eulogizers. Right, there's people you tell them a little bit about your relative, and mamish they made it into a hesped that was, a real beautiful, like emotional hesped. So Rabbi Yossi says, so the Gemara says, Lo Ya'ora Adam Ameso, you should not go ahead and engage in mourning practices over your deceased relative. V'lo yaspidenu, nor should you eulogize them. Kodem regal l'shloshim yom, within 30 days before Yom Tov. So we'll say this is really very interesting, because what the Mishnah is doing over here is limiting mourning practices, not just on. So we'll say, I want to just point out like the transition. The Mishnah began with the concept of gathering remains on Yom Tov itself, And that's a machlokes, right? So the first opinion the Mishnah says, Rabbi Meir says, it's mutter because it actually gives a person simcha, knowing that they're bringing their parents' remain to a family plot. Rabbi Yossi says, absolutely, you can't do that. That creates avelos. That's sad. The Mishnah then transitions to limiting mourning practices before Yom Tiv, right? The last part of the Mishnah is talking about mourning practices before Yom Tiv. And even within a month before Yom Tiv, you have to be careful, you have to curtail mourning practices in order that it doesn't create an atmosphere of mourning on Yom Tiv itself. Says the Gemara, or minhu. But I meant to mention on the last sugya, just the tzara sugya, just one other takeaway, just a simple yisod, which you all know, which is how powerful it is that in the tzaras sugya, you notice that the final conclusion is everything is dependent on the word of the Kohen. Right? One of the great pieces of Musar from the whole parsha of tzaras is how words create realities. We often assume that words are just words, right? Words are nothing, actions are everything. Now that is true. Actions absolutely speak louder than words, but words absolutely unequivocally create realities. And we see this in different ways, right? Words could create tumah, as what happens with saras. Words could create tara, as what happens with saras. We see this ultimately by karbanos. You could take an animal, right? You could take an animal, and one moment it's an animal, the sheep is a sheep. The next moment you say harezu ola, and suddenly again there's a brand new level of sanctity conferred upon this animal. We'll say our words really have a dramatic impact, and our words, right? The koach hadibor absolutely creates realities. All right, back to this Gemara. So says the Gemara, or minhu hamalake, that's almost atzmos avivi imo harezim is aval aleim kolayom. Ula erev ein misavel alein. I both say there's an interesting halacha, and this is halacha l'mais nochos avelus. We'll say if a person is going ahead and moving the remains of their parent, all right, it's not just parents, anyone who you're obligated to mourn for. Person's moving the remains of a loved one. What's the halacha? You observe essentially 1 day of Shiva. The day that you're moving the remains, you're in a state of Shiva just for that day. Literally the day. Nightfall comes, it's no longer there. There is this kind of bubble of avelos that overtakes you that day. So we'll say, so the Gemara is raising a kasha, because here Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah said that on Chalamai you're allowed to go ahead and move the remains of your parent. Why? Because he says simcha. The Gemara says simcha, you have to observe like a quasi shiva on that day that you move your parents' remains. Furthermore, again the Gemara says, this is interesting. Even if the remains are in a sheet that you're carrying. In other words, like, even if you don't see the remains. This is not a didn't see the remains. Let's say the remains are packed up, right? And all you're doing is engaging in the transfer. Halacha l'maisi, you still have to observe a day of avelos that day. So how could the Mishnah Sakra say it's a day of simcha? Amar Abaye, listen to this. Mipnei shesimchas haregel alav. No. What it means is as follows. What it means is that halacha l'maisa, what Rameir is saying is, look at Rashi, mivnei shesimchas haragalav kilomar, harbehu osek, besimchas haragal, ve'inu mitzter b'malakit atzmos avimo. Rameir says like this, even though you're collecting the remains of your parents, and under a normal circumstance, that would generate a bubble, right, a small window of avelos, because you're so immersed in the simcha of Yom Tiv, you don't feel that avelos. That's Rabbi Meir's idea. I agree with you that during the rest of the year, if you do this, it generates a sense of avelos, and you have to observe like a shortened period of Shiva. But on Yom Tiv, you're so shakua, right? You're so immersed in the simcha of Yom Tiv that you don't feel the avelos of this moment. So they will say that's the machlokes. Now the truth is, we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, and therefore again we would not move remains on Chalamayid, because ultimately again we paskin that whenever a person does move remains, halacha l'maisa, they have a very short period of Shiva. During that, this is not Shiva, it's 1 day, right? They will go ahead and observe a shortened period of avelos during that 1 day of the removal, and therefore we will not do that on Chalamayid itself. Incredible. Lo ya'arer al meso. So let's listen to this. What does it mean? L'may lo ya'arer al meso. So Amarav kat hader sapdona b'ma'arava amri yifkun imei kom meriri liba. They will say they had these eulogizers in Eretz Yisrael, and these eulogizers would come around and they would say, Yifkon Ime, cry with him, Kol Meriri Libe, all those who are of bitter heart. So the idea being is you would not go ahead and hire these people on Chalamayid, because again, at the end of the day, they usher in, they're good at their job. They're good at their job, and their job is to awaken emotion within people over loss. Okay, Rashi says over Yifkun imei afilu hachi asr lemeimar b'moed hainu lo ya'ara mesis. So we'll say you're not allowed to. So in other words, when these people would eulogize, they would encourage others to cry with those who had encountered loss. So it created a wave of emotion, and therefore again the Mishnah says you're not allowed to have someone do this on Yom Tiv. Okay, Kodim Haragal Shloshim Yom. So we'll say it's actually very interesting. So then the Mishnah said that halacha lemaisa lo ye'or adam ameisa v'lo yaspidenu kodem l'regel shloshim yom. So we'll say, so you shouldn't engage the services of this eulogizer within 30 days. The crier, the eulogizer, you should not go ahead and engage their services. Now the Gemara says, this is fascinating. Maishna shloshim yom. So we'll say, so what? Why 30 days? Watch this. Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Listen to this. Maise ba'adam echad shekines ma'os lalos l'regel. There was once a guy who had saved money for Aliyah l'regel. Right? The boss said it costs money to make the trip for Aliyah l'regel. He was saving money. Uba sapton va'amad al pesach beiso, and a sapton, a eulogizer, came to his house and knocked on the door and started eulogizing. Whether this person experienced the loss or maybe he was just in town, right? He's going door to door eulogizing. So what happens? V'nat losan ishto v'nas nasan lo. And the wife was so moved by the eulogy that what did she do? She took the aliyah l'regel money and she gave it to the eulogizer. V'nimna v'lo Allah. And the guy didn't make Ali. He didn't go on Aliyah l'regel. He had no money. He didn't make Aliyah l'regel. He didn't go up to Yerushalayim on that Yom Tiv. So we'll say, Ba'osa Shah, this is a fascinating story. Ba'osa Shah, on that moment, they said, Amru, lo ye'orer al meso v'lo yaspidenu kodem l'regel shloshim yom. At that point, Chazal said, you know what? A person should not go ahead and essentially eulogize or hire eulogizes for their dead within 30 days. So I will say, now you have to ask yourself something fascinating. Really, because one story happened one time, Chazal make all come? No, so of course not. Again, I will say that's not, we know that's not how halacha works, right? But what it's saying is Chazal saw that this was a concern. In other words, people used the services of these eulogizers frequently, and again they charged money, and there is a limited pool of resources within the community, and if people are paying eulogizers 30 days, within the 30 days before Yom Tov, remember again, if there's one thing you could count on, it's what? One thing you could count on at all times is people die. Right? Death is something you could definitely count on, which means that there are going to be levayas leading right up to. I remember the first levaya I ever did, right? When I first got into the house, the first levaya I ever did was a levaya on Erev Pesach. It took place 45 minutes before Yom Tiv. 45 minutes before my first levaya, 45 minutes before Yom Tiv. So let's say, so again, there was a. Those are interesting situations because the person sat Shiva for maybe 6 minutes. That was it. They sat actually in the cemetery for maybe 6 minutes. That was the end because Yom Tiv cancels out Shiva. We're actually going to see these sugis in Moed Katan. Again, an interesting dynamic. But the point that Chazal understood was people have, right? So people always die and people have limited resources. And therefore, again, people are going to go ahead and, right, these eulogizers were an important part of the Levaya service. So today people have a rabbi to officiate. It seems like Bismana Gemara, or maybe you didn't have rabbis, right, officiating. You had these eulogizers, right? You had these people, and you paid them money. So the idea the Gemara says over here is, we're nervous that people have limited resources, people die all the time, and people are going to go ahead and use their resources for this and not end up being Ola Regel. And therefore Chazal said, you know what, for the 30 days before Yom Tiv, when people are generally saving for the Aliyah Regel trip, we don't want you hiring eulogizers. Incredible. Shmuel says, we'll say Amud Beis, Shmuel Amar, Lefi she'ena meis mishtachech min alev shloshim yom. So we'll say Shmuel says something a little bit different. The reason we don't want these eulogizers, right, or general hespedim within 30 days is because the dead is not forgotten for 30 days. Now what does that mean? Take a look at the top Rashi, Ches Amud Beis, Lefi she'ena meis mishtachech min alev shloshim yom, kilomar, kevan de meis, im mishtachech min alev shloshim yom, im maspida pachos min shloshim yom lifnei haregel, asi lemisped beregel da'adai l'shachar. Well, this is very interesting. Abai says the concern is like this. within 30 days, the loss is felt most acutely. Most acutely. Let's say the kinds of shloshim. Therefore, what Chazal were nervous about is as follows. If you're eulogizing within 30 days of Yom Tiv, you'll probably end up still being in a state of eulogizing on Yom Tiv itself. So this has nothing to do with spending money and just everything to do with the emotional state that I'm going to be in once Yom Tiv comes. And Abaye says, Chazal did not want me to be in the emotional state of active eulogizing on Yom Tiv, because that will erode my Simchas Yom Tiv, and therefore they said no eulogies within 30 days. So therefore, I will say, so according to Rav, the issue of no eulogies within 30 days is a financial issue. We don't want you spending your aliyah, the regal money on the eulogizers. And according to Shmuel, thank you. According to Shmuel, again, the issue is one of being in a proper emotional state for Yom Tiv. And if you're eulogizing within 30 days before Yom Tiv, your emotional state is going to be one of eulogy and loss. And when it comes to Yom Tiv, we need you to be v'samachta v'chagecha in a state of joy. My Ben Abba said, what's the practical difference in these two opinions? Very simple. Ika benayu dika avid b'chinam. Let's say your best friend is a professional eulogizer, and he says, "You know what? This one I'm going to give right. First one's on the house, right? I'm going to give you the first eulogy for free." So we'll say, so now again, according to Rav, there's no financial issue because my aliyah l'regel money is safe, right? It's good. I don't need to spend any money. But Lamaisa, according to Shmuel, the issue of being in an emotional state of loss coming into Yom Tov is still present, and therefore, again, I will say it would not work. In other words, or you would not be able to do it. So we'll say it happens to be, we paskin halacha Lamaisa, that we would not hire eulogizers. We do deliver hespedim even within 30 days of Yom Tov. This is actually an interesting machlokes harishonim. There are many rishonim that say we should not deliver eulogies within 30 days. We do deliver eulogies. We won't deliver eulogies on Erev Yom Tov, right? On Erev Yom Tov, but halacha l'mais we do deliver eulogies. Although I will say in Chodesh Nisan, right? In Chodesh Nisan, we don't deliver eulogies. Again, this is a whole discussion in general about what to do in situations where we don't deliver eulogies. The halachic definition of a eulogy, of a hesped, is a speech that is designed to evoke sorrow, sadness, and loss. So often, based on an Odebi Yehuda, what we do in times where eulogies are aser is we limit our words to what we call divrei shelach, words of praise. And once you know this, there are two ways you could deliver a eulogy. You could deliver a eulogy that focuses on, I can't believe what we lost, right? So young, so much to do, so much to accomplish, or focus on the positive things about the person. Here is what this person meant. Here is what they stood for. Here is what they lived for. So I'm focusing on the positive. So the Noda Yehuda says, divrei shavach, words of praise, are permitted even when eulogies are aser. So again, when to use that Noda Yehuda, how to use that Noda Yehuda, is a whole discussion in halacha. But again, I will say that's the sugya. Good, let's go back to Mishnah. Let's say incredible sugyas. Ein chofrin kuchin ukvaras b'moed. I will say you can't dig kuchin and kvaras. We're going to define those terms in the Gemara. On Yom Tov, on Chalamayda, we'll say why. Rashi says, Tircha Yisera. Now we're talking about if you don't need it, right? If you don't need it. So sometimes they want to proactively dig graves, so that graves are ready whenever you will need them. Can't do it on Chalamayda. Tircha Yisera. Aval Mechanchen Esa Kuchin. But I will say, what can you do? You could adjust Kuchin, which are already dug. Again, we'll discuss that as well. Va'osin nivrachas b'moed. You could go ahead and make va'osin nivrachas is a laundry pool. A laundry pool. You can make a laundry pool on chalamayid. Va'arnim ameis b'chatzor. You could also fashion a casket. Now, so you could build a casket, a coffin, as long as what? As long as you're doing it in the same chatzor, in the same courtyard in which the deceased is lying. In other words, the concern the Mishnah has with making a casket is you can't proactively make caskets. In other words, you can't say, you know what, listen, after our previous sugya, I'm off from work anyway, might as well knock out a couple of caskets, right? You can't, right? That you can't do. That you can't do. What you can do is create the casket because someone died and you say you buried it on Chalamayid. But in order to do that, you have to make the casket in the same chutzner that the deceased is lying in. Because this way people know that I'm making it for the deceased. Rabbi Yehuda says you can do it, but the boards have to already be cut. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't cut boards on Yom Tiv. So if the boards are already cut before Yom Tiv, you could assemble the casket again in the chutzner where the mace is, but you can't start cutting boards on Yom Tiv. Says the Gemara, my kuchen and my kvaras. So we'll say, what's kuchen and kvaras? Listen, this is fascinating. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, kuchen bechafira, kvaras bebinyan. They both say this is fascinating. Kuchen refers to, I mentioned this before, this is what say they had burial caves, and the way you would bury people is you would dig into the sides of the cave. You would hollow out a cavity. Both say they bury like this today in Har HaMenuchos. Now they're building whole subterranean chambers in Har HaMenuchos, and literally again, they're burying people in the sides of, in the walls of the cave. It's underground burial, but it's in the walls of the cave. So you hollow it out, you slide the body in, you seal it up, and that's the burial chamber. So the Gemara says, so that's kuchen. Kvaros ababinyan. But so listen to this. Kvaros is actually, you build a structure on top of the body, but it's not in the ground, it's on top of the ground. Rabbi said that's also called in the ground burial. In other words, if you go ahead and you build some earthen structure on top of the body, that's called kavura, right? That's called the kavura. But good. So kavura bebinyan. So Tanya Rabbi said that supports this. Elohin kuchen, Elohin kvaros. Whether it's in kuchen and kvaros, kuchen bechafira. Kuchen is dug out inside of the wall of the cave. Ukvaras bebinyan, and ultimately again the kever is on a structure on top of the ground. Now both say, so again, I want to be clear. It's not the pshat, just so you understand, it's not the pshat that like there's a coffin sitting on the ground and you build like a house around it. What it means is you're building an earthen structure right on top of the coffin, right? So that's considered burial ba'aretz. That's considered burial in the earth as well. If there's earth on top of the kever, even if you're not going in and digging into the ground itself. So we'll say, see, you can't go ahead and proactively dig graves on Chalamayid because that's tircha yisera. But what kind do mechanchen es hakuchen? Keitza mechanchen Rav Yehuda shimhaya aruch mekatzro. But so what it means is, if the grave, let's say again, you had a kuch that was too long, right? Too long. You can narrow it. Right, you can make it shorter. You can make it more narrow. Mekatzro b'masni satana marich bo marchiv bo. So you can make it longer. You can make it shorter. You can make it wider. You can make it thinner. In other words, if it's already there, then halacha l'maisa you could adjust it to fit the needs of the mason. We'll say it's fascinating. By the way, the lashon, right? Mechanchen es hakuchen. Right. So what does mechanchen es hakuchen mean? You could adjust the burial space. So we'll say it's fascinating because you see from here that what's the essence of chinuch, right? What's this key to successful chinuch? It has to be adjusted. Right? No two children learn the same, right? No two children are the same, whether the way that as parents we're mechanech our children, or a yeshiva, or a school is mechanech its students, right? Chinuch has to be adjusted. Sometimes a little wider, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer, sometimes, but no, there's no such thing as this is the model. This is the model, and it's going to work for everyone. Chinuch means ability to adjust and pivot, each according to their needs. Vos nivrechas. So I'll say very quickly, we'll just finish with this. You can make a nivrechas. My nivrechas, Amar Yehuda, zubakia. This is a bakia. Very helpful. This is a bakia. Now the Gemara says over here, we're going to see bakia also means a laundry pool. So the Gemara says, Vatanya nivrechas vabakia. Amar Abaye b'tema Rav Kana kiha ubar giha. Again, exceptionally helpful. Kiha ubar giha means a large pool and a small pool. So we'll say often what they would have is they would build a large pool, again, for laundry purposes or for other types of purposes, and they would have like a small runoff pool. So interestingly enough, apparently, according to the Gemara, the creation of these laundry pools it's relatively easy. And I will say, remember again, are you allowed to do laundry on Chalamayid? Can you do laundry on Chalamayid? It depends. If you need it, you can, right? You can't do laundry for no reason, but let's say your Yom Tif clothing is dirty and all you have is one set of Yom Tif clothing. If you need to do laundry, you're permitted to do so. Because of that, the creation of the laundry pool is mutter, and it's not a problem of Tircha because it's considered to be something you could construct with relative ease, right? We'll have to stop over here. Meretz Hashem will pick up here tomorrow. Shkoyach. Now you have some more. Now you have some more for today. I'll show you.